If you do get in a fight on the streets and you are a professional fighter, they're gonna look at you as a lethal weapon. We're gonna go over MMA myths that we all thought were true. Now, I got my man Nick with me, and we're gonna call this Table Talk with Mr. Metal Muscle and Daru Strong. But let's go over some myths that, some MMA fans and MMA enthusiasts thought were true, and now we know that it's no longer applied.
I got into a conversation with someone about 6, 7 years ago, and they would not let me be right. They said, a fighter can't get into a fight in the real world because if they do, they'll go to prison for murder because their hands are registered weapons, like having guns literally as hands.
Yeah.
And I thought that kind of sounded crazy. I looked it up and I saw that ain't quite right. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, when you become a professional fighter, I had to register as a fighter for the state and the commission. So with that, you're looked upon as being very dangerous. Obviously, you're a dangerous person. You know how to fight because you train it. So if you do get in an altercation, and you do go to court, the judge may say that yes, he's a trained fighter, he's trained to hurt people, and that may cause an issue. Now, I'm not saying that it's looked upon as yes, your hands are lethal weapons, and if you throw a punch, that's accepted as attempted murder or something.
They're entitled to self-defense, right? If they do get into altercation.
I believe so, but I mean, at the end of the day, just based on the issue, if that wasn't a self-defense and it wasn't known as self-defense, let's say there was he say, she say, or whatever the case. I'm not a lawyer, but what I will say is this, is that if you do get in a fight on the streets and you are a professional fighter, just be prepared to go through the ringer because they're gonna look at you as a lethal weapon. Not saying it's registered, but people perceive you as someone that can really hurt somebody.
Yeah, the jury and judge will use their discretion and be like, oh, he has his background, so intent, right? That's what the court case is about, the intent, right? So it's assault. If I do it as a civilian, they'd be like, okay, he beat that guy up. But if you did it when you were fighting or someone we work with did it, it's like, oh, what's his intent? Because I think assault is just like a threat, like, oh, I'm gonna knock you out. But if you come over there, say that, and then knock him out, they're gonna be like, well, he's trained MMA for the last decade, so he probably did that jump.
Yeah, I had to be very careful, and I know a lot of my guys that I work with have to be very, very careful. And the good thing about, when you start to train too, I remember when I was a kid growing up in middle school, high school, like I had a chip on my shoulder, and I always felt like I had to fight, because of where I grew up, so on and so forth. When I started training, all that went out the window. Like I didn't even care about fighting on the street because I did it every day in the gym. So like the ego, none of that stuff, like I think that for me, I was more confident in my abilities, so it allowed me not have to worry about fighting in the street. You see what I'm saying? So now with that, I believe that if anybody is looking to get away from that mentality, go in and actually train. You don't have to be a pro fighter, but if you do some MMA or you do some jiu-jitsu, you become more confident, right? And for that allows you to push away the negativity and just let go of petty squabbles that may cause you, further issues down the line with the law.
Makes sense.
All right, so the next one is MMA is more dangerous than boxing. What do you think about that?
So I guess it would depend, like, how are we defining dangerous? Are we going off of likeness to get injured? Are we going off of, say, head trauma? Because that's obviously a big issue in fight sports. So I guess we need to know that first. So
there was a peer-reviewed scientific study including that there was a comparative analysis of injuries across MMA and boxing in the same study in 2015. Now this paper was written by Dr. Shelby Cartman. It's right here if you guys want to check it out, from the University of Alberta in Canada. The research, which attracted widespread media back in autumn of 2015, the professional boxers were most likely sustained no injuries in a given contest. Now, MMA fighters were most likely sustained injuries in general, but those injuries were more likely relative to minor bruising and cuts and things like that, which makes sense. Now, professional boxers, on the other hand, were significantly more likely to suffer severe injuries. So that's including loss of consciousness and also eye injuries like damage to the retina. Right? Boxers were almost twice as likely to sustain concussions that involve loss of consciousness, and the average medical suspension for boxers were 26 days compared to the 20 days that MMA fighters did, which suggests that there was a higher prevalence of severe injuries with the boxers, right? Obviously.
See, that's why I asked that question. You know, I'm a researcher, so operational definitions matter. So if we just went off strictly, like I said, injuries, no other definition, we would say MMA, right? But the fact that it said those are like bumps and bruises, nicks and cuts, because you're grappling, you might get thrown to the ground. But with boxing, all of the injuries were more severe, concussions, attached retinas, things of that nature, being knocked out, unconscious. I obviously would rather not suffer that versus, you know, nicks and bruises.
So would you categorize that as being more dangerous because of the higher level of concussions, or is it more dangerous overall because there's more ways to get injured?
I think it would be more so boxing because of the higher rate of the severity, because the rate of being injured, if it's not that bad, like if I could walk around with a strained quad or a bruised rib, it's not it's not preferable, but I don't want to get knocked unconscious. I don't want to, and obviously I'm the brain guy, so that makes sense. That losing consciousness is not a good thing. Obviously, any injury,
retina, all of that.
Retina. Too, so these are injuries over time that are going to have long-term effects. A bruised rib is going to heal. A strained quad is going to heal.
Yeah, broken leg will heal.
A broken leg, like we saw plenty of people, Silva and Weidman.
Connor.
Yeah, it broke in half.
I was boxing the bleeding head off him.
So they're walking around right now, but. That brain trauma when you're 45, 50 years old with the mind of an 80-year-old, that's shoot, even younger nowadays, we got CT and stuff. So by that definition, I would say boxing, because quality of life, that's, I think, the worst part. Your quality of life will shift because now you're going to not be all there.
This one's pretty funny because it's close to my heart. When you become a pro fighter, you get paid like a professional, right? So you have, when I was, you have all these other sports, right? You have boxing, you have
NBA,
American football, NBA, baseball,
soccer now.
Guys get paid, man. Girls get paid, right? And you know, for the most part, MMA is the newest sport in that sense, other than bare knuckle right now. But it is the newest sport to come about from a combat sports perspective. And the reason why, I guess, the reason why fighters aren't getting paid enough right now is because the sport is not as long lasting. It's been around. It's not been around for that long.
That's a classic argument, like with women's sports. Not to get on to like feminists or against that or anything, but the same premise is they're not doing as well, not because no one cares. Because I would argue that MMA is getting a lot of like new fans and it's getting a lot of buzz, but monetarily, it has to look good on paper, like it has to be in the black. For those who don't understand business, that's a profit, right? So if it's not doing that, where does the money come from? But some would even argue is there is money there, they're just kind of leveling it up at the top ranks, right? Like the big name fighters are gonna get the bulk of that.
They're gonna get the most of the money,
And they're also, I guess the difference too is with NFL or NBA, they're actual employees of said team. So if I play for the Dallas Mavericks, that's my boss. But with the UFC, for example, they're all contract workers. They get 6 fights for X amount of money plus bonuses. It's like no matter how well they perform, or other than fight night bonus and stuff like that, they don't have benefits. They're not going to be able to do certain things. So I think that doesn't help either. That there's not a unionized like setup.
And it's going to be very hard for them to be unionized because there's just one particular person that's actually fighting. It's not a team-orientated sport. So that would be very hard, and especially because there's a lot of egos in the sport too as well. So that does play a big role. But for me, I found out the hard way, right? My first pro fight, I made like $200, right? and I spent that going back home. So yeah, I found out the very hard way that, you know, it's going to take some time if you want to build up your career, your brand, things like that. You know, you have to do things to turn some heads, and that's why you see guys like Conor McGregor and even Colby Covington like go out of their way to make a splash and turn heads, because they need to build their brand. And even though you may not agree with their approach, they're still making you listen and watch, right? So that's where the money will come in, through outside sources, right? Branding, you know, sponsorship, things of that nature. And then people want to pay to see them. So that's where it'll come into play. But for the most part, it's still a very new sport. It will continue to grow, and then we can see the money come in a little bit more. But again, they're in their infancy stage of their sport.
Would you argue I think this may be controversial, what I'm about to say, but I think the women do a good job of that, using their brand. Now, it may be on a, I'm not gonna say any names, if you know what I'm talking about, how they use their brand to get, more money. I don't think the men really do that, and we work with a lot of male athletes, and I've heard you even have conversations with some of them on, hey man, you need to do X, Y, Z, and they're like, yeah, you're right, I don't even use my social media. And it's like, they're leaving money on the table, and you do this yourself with Daru Strong, I do it with my business, so it's like, they really aren't monetizing every aspect. It's like any business, right? Most of the money is gonna be made through different streams of revenue, so.
Yeah, just capitalizing on their ability to be seen, right? So increasing attention is important. So when you do that, people will want to pay to see you, and other companies will want to pay you to push their product because they know that you have a large amount of attention drawn to you. So it all comes down to that, is like leveraging all these other opportunities and not just focusing on just the sport to pay you. That's when you can make some money. At the time, it's different than boxing. Obviously, guys are getting paid, and especially the more famous, more well-known boxers are getting paid way more than some of the well-known MMA fighters, especially even in the UFC. So how do you do that? Well, we do know that the UFC primarily is a little bit more wide range, right? There's very strategic ways of doing it to where it can make you famous, not necessarily a direct amount of money, but you can use that fame, you can use that attention to leverage other opportunities to make you money on the back end. With boxing, there's traditionalists, there's a lot of old money, which you would say, right? And there's a lot of money that backs them, but it's only for the big fights, right? And even with those younger kids coming up, they can make some money through sponsorship and things like that. But when you become a UFC fighter, everybody knows about the UFC. And even though it's a newer sport, the brand is so big. So you leverage the brand. So you can go to the UFC, right? Be a UFC fighter and have that as, okay, I'm now a UFC veteran. You do one fight in the UFC and you become a veteran. That's how it is. So like, you could have 2-3 fights in the UFC, get cut, and now you still have that on your resume as a UFC vet. So now you can go do seminars, you can go do super fights, things like that, and have that, and that'll increase your value because people are like, damn, that's a UFC fighter, I wanna go check him out, or or her, or whoever. And so the goal is to, if you do get into the UFC, or you do get into Bellator, or any of those bigger promotions, leverage that, right? Leverage it.
Speaking of that, do you think there's a monopoly? I saw this documentary, and these are experts who are saying that they kind of got a monopoly on the fight game. They bought out pretty much all the big fight factions. There's only like a handful left, and they're not doing near the numbers as the UFC. So going back to the main topic of being paid, just like with like gas stations, right? Why are gas stations on every corner? Because it makes competition. Therefore, oh, it's $2.59 there, but no, it's $2.39 here.
You
can't do that if you have a monopoly and you be like, nope, we're paying this. Go somewhere else and get nothing. So it's like,
yeah, I could see that. I mean, they're strong arming a lot of other promotions. Let's put it like that. But that's it may not be fair, quote unquote, but it's business. And you can't fault them for wanting to be the best and dominating the competition. So the UFC is not going anywhere anytime soon. So if you do want to be known as an MMA fighter, in that perspective, you want to push yourself more towards the UFC. If you want to get paid directly, and I do know that Bellator and ONE FC, they pay better, like overall, in the beginning. If you're a Conor McGregor or somebody like that, then obviously you're gonna get paid no matter where you're at. But nobody knows, unfortunately, nobody knows a lot of the roster for ONE FC unless you live over there. Not gonna lie. Right?
Mighty Mouse?
Yeah.
And I worked with them. That's kind of why I knew it.
Right? And even with Bellator now, they're on the come up, but they're not at that level where the UFC is.
Well, I think, I don't want to misquote it, but Yuri Prochazka, he was in either, if it wasn't Bellator, it might have been KSW. He was in one of those. And guess what? He fought there, built up his brand, and did what he do. Instead of just staying there and be like, I'm the man here, goes to UFC and becomes the light heavyweight champion. So it's kind of like just proving the point that even though he established himself in one organization, he's like, I got to get to the big leagues, and I don't want to down those other organizations, but UFC is the big league.
That's everywhere. Like, look at Michael Chandler, right?
Oh yeah, same thing.
And even Eddie Alvarez, they skyrocketed up the ranks because of they were so successful in Bellator. So now he's like, okay, we can sell some more tickets. Obviously, Michael Chandler's a great athlete, a great fighter. So it's faster, you know, but think about that. You getting to that level that quickly, you don't see that with somebody just coming off, you know, out of the regional scene. Like they have to work their way up,
basically.
You know, so bringing up your branding and then using the UFC to help leverage that to gain more attention, that can help you bring more money in on the back end. And then from there, as your brand grows, now the UFC takes note of that, because now more fans are coming to see you, and now they up your.
It's kind of like venture capital. They want to find a company that's making about $500,000 to $1 million. They're like, all right, that's not bad. If you get our backing, that goes up to 20 mil, and now we all eat. Well,
Exactly.
the venture capitalists probably eat a little bit more, but
Listen, you have to be good, right? You have to be skillful.
definitely, that's a given. That's a given.
The talent has to be there. You have to be charismatic, right? So there's a lot of times where I see great fighters that really do not have that quality. So people don't really want to see them. They're boring. And even though they win fights in boring fashion. So like, nobody really wants to stay and watch them fight. And that was the problem with Colby Covington, right? Colby is a really good fighter. And I've seen it happen. I've watched him. He had to raise some eyebrows, turn some heads, and cause some, what you would call it?
Chaos. Rock the boat a little bit.
Chaos is a perfect word. Colby Chaos Covington.
Oh yeah, that's it. I ain't try to do that.
Exactly. So he made some ripples in the water, right? A little bit more than
very heated president that a lot of people didn't like, and
of course
that actually helped this brand, because I heard people who knew nothing about MMA. You see this fighter in the White House, Colby, and I'm like, you know him? Like, no, but I don't. They didn't like Trump, so that's why there's no, what they say, no such thing as bad publicity.
Of course,
it's how you flex it to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, and if you don't mind people hating you, go ahead and do your thing.
Well, I heard a saying, I forget who said it, but it was like, 1 week they love you, 1 week they hate you, both weeks get paid. So it is what it is. Shouts out to whoever came up. I saw it on the tweet one time. But.
So to circle back, if you want to get paid as an MMA fighter, raise attention, build your brand, start doing some things that are gonna give you some attention. And then from there, make sure that you're good, make sure that you're increasing your skill set, make sure that you're working on your game, because you don't want to be somebody like some names that I'm not gonna name.
I think I knew you were gonna say, but let's leave it alone.
And the goal is to be a well-respected athlete, well-respected fighter. You want to be respected by your peers.
Of course, yeah.
And then also you want people to want to watch you. And that's how you're gonna, raise your overall income. All right, so the last one, this is more on the strength and conditioning side. Circuit training for conditioning across the board for MMA. That's it.
So this is another one close to home, I guess, for you.
It really is. And so when I was coming up, like, I always put emphasis on strength training, even when I was starting as an amateur and then going into the pro level. I always knew that getting stronger was going to set the base for everything. Now, with that being said, I did circuit training. I did a lot of it, 5x5s and, different stations and everything else. And there is a certain place and a time for that, but you still need to have a proper program. You still need to have a systematic approach, and you need to lead into that if the athlete actually needs that particular stimulus. A lot of times, especially back, I would say 5, maybe even 8 to 10 years ago, 10 years ago for sure, that was like the only thing you did across the board, because it directly mimicked the time frame of the fight. And because it's so specific, or at least simulated, guys thought that was what you needed to do, but neglected all these other demands that go with the sport and all these other helping type of modalities that can transfer over and increase the overall value of your game. So improving on your force production, improving on your rate of force, that stuff needs to come into play, and you cannot do that in a circuit fashion working that lactic system all the time. So, that there's a time and place for that, but I think that nowadays, we're bringing in great coaches, great strength and conditioning coaches with a solid scientific background that understand the bioenergetic demands of the sport, and then also understand the sport from a biomechanics standpoint, from a physiological standpoint, that can enhance the quality of the fighter and then get them peaked and ready for the fight, as opposed to just running them into the ground doing circuit training.
And that's a good point. I think the bioenergetic point is probably the most important, because like you said, they did these 5-minute circuits. So their logic, I get it, 5-minute fight or a 5-minute round, 5-minute workout or a round and a workout. But I think, to me being a track guy, I think they get it very well when it comes to bioenergetics, because you don't run a mile to get ready for the 100-meter dash. They understand that if it needs to look like this on the track, it needs to look like this on the practice, but they know how to break it down. And you see this a lot with your athletes who come in here. I've seen, like, maybe not as much now, because you've definitely built that authority where they don't question you no more. But I've seen back in the days when we were at another place and they would be like, whoa, should I do another 5 miles of road work after? And it's like, and I'll watch you like, bro, like, you just did a full strenuous workout. In their heads, like, but I know I'm supposed to do this because it's what most fighters do. And I think that's another part. They just do what's tradition.
Yeah, it's what such and such did in the past, and it worked for them, so it has to work for me.
Correlation, not causation.
Exactly. So with that, it's all subjective, right? And some people do need that. I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing to do at all. Like, you can never do that. There's definitely a time and a place for it. And usually I stick that closer to the fight if the athlete needs that type of conditioning, right? They need that lactic buffering capacity, and they need to work on several different movements and flow into them. But that would be more predicated to what they do on the mat. So they would use that at a specific time with the simulation of an actual fight. So they're grappling, they're hitting pads, whatever. They can do tech sparring, and then dog in the hole, where they'll have several different training partners go in fresh where they're somewhat fatigued, and so they have to defend themselves and be still technically efficient under that fatigue. That's a really good thing to do, but that's not something that you do throughout the entire year. So you have to build a solid base of strength and conditioning and endurance and all that, you know, then transition into your power, and then go into those lactic zones if needed. Right? And that all comes with the assessment process, understanding what you actually need. Whether you're training yourself and being very self-aware, or you have a coach that puts you through a quality assessment and a program that is catered towards peaking you at the right times. So one, you don't overtrain, and two, you're ready when the time comes to actually get the job done when it's most necessary, which is in the fight, you know?
Do you think this myth may have came from the fact that, let's say, if we're going to use MMA for an example, the early 90s when the UFC started. So let's say around that time, the only example of weight training or strength training was really bodybuilders. Do you think that plays a factor? Because this is a weight-based sport, and all they've seen for the last, from the 60s to the 90s was Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lee Haney, Lou Ferrigno. So they associate, oh, they lift weights. My fighter needs to stay in the 155 or the 170 category. So if they lift weights, and I know you've seen this from people come trying to go against you because of that reason, right? So you think that that can play a factor, that they misconceive that bodybuilders are just the only ones who lift weights?
Yeah, bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen, strength athletes, right? And so there's not a right or wrong way. It's just, what's the right way for that individual, right? So bodybuilding may come into play if an athlete actually needs to increase their weight to get into another weight class. With that being said, you have to put the right amount of muscle on and maintain your mobility and maintain your speed. That's why I like a concurrent system or a conjugated style, because we can work on all these demands and then focus on one thing at a time, still keeping everything turned on, right? But we just turn up one dial at a time, depending on the focus point. With strength training, and we use powerlifting movements, we use some Olympic lifting movements if they have the ability to do so. They have the technical efficiency, the joint integrity, the overall capacity to withstand those movements. And then we use things like sprint work. I use a lot of track exercises, right? A lot of track warm-up drills, you know, because I want them to be better athletes. So if I can use these sports to increase their athletic ability, that can transfer over into being a better fighter, based on movement quality, coordination, balance, control, strength, rate of force, power production, all of that, man, we're in a good spot, you know, because if they have the skill set, if they are working their technique, then we use all these things that we get inside the weight room and we just transfer it over on the mats and into the cage. So that's where it needs to be.
Nice.
All right, guys, so there you have it. We had 4 myths that we debunked, or at least gave you some details on why they're not so true at the moment and why you should be thinking a little bit differently. All right, drop us a comment down below if you have some myths that you want to talk about. Make sure you like the video if you like this style, this cross, what we call it?
Dang.
Table talk? Table talk.
I'm supposed to remember these things.
Like the video if you like this table talk style. Also, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification, and thank you for supporting the channel. If you want to find out more details on my mentorship program, it's a 3-month program, but you'll get access for life with a one-time fee. So check it out down below if you want to be involved with 5,000 other coaches from around the world trying to get better and increasing their performance and the athletes that they work with. So check it out down below, and I'll see you again next time. Peace.